I guess lately I've had that whole thing about the circle of life kind of on my brain. And I think most of us know it's best when the circle of life kind of moves forward. I mean, that's the way most of us like it to move. You know, you grow up, you try to take care of your friends and family. We get jobs, we learn, we progress. Our parents and our grandparents get older, and then we get older, and hopefully young people learn from us. You work hard, and then if you're lucky, maybe you can retire. And you have a chance to step back and look on your life and feel good about the circle of life that you've carried on and passed on to those who come after you. And I know most of us, I certainly try to control my circle. You know, you make good decisions, you provide for your family, you save some money, you do some planning. But then there are times when the circle of life goes backwards. Maybe your kid gets sick. Your life partner is not there anymore. You work hard, but for some reason it's not working. You make a really stupid mistake, and that stupid mistake changes your life forever. Or like me, you know, you think you got it all figured out, and then you realize that you don't got it figured out. And we realize, as much as we try, we don't have total control over that circle of life. And sometimes the circle moves too fast. Things come at us, and we just can't get it all done. And then there are times when that circle of life goes incredibly slow, and you wish you could just move forward. And in the middle of all that, I'm sure no matter how strong you are, you got to have moments when you begin to doubt yourself. And then when we discover, maybe, hopefully through maybe coming to church or just sitting back, that it's in that circle of life, that's where God lives. That's where God speaks to us. Even when it goes too fast or too slow or even goes backwards, somehow if we step back and listen to our spirit and heart song, we know that somehow in that circle, God is there and walks that circle with us. I'm thinking about a lot of the kids who've grown up here, those poor little goofs that come up every Sunday and listen to my stories. I think of Tommy and Nova, who will sit at a table to kind of raise money for something that's important to them. But you know, these little guys, little girls, hopefully they'll know that as time goes on in that circle, the church is always going to be there for them. I got a letter this week from one of our relatively young members, and anything under 70 is relatively young to me, but this young man is in his upper 30s, has kids in Sunday school. In that letter he said, "I know, Pastor, that we don't get to church as often as we should, but I want you to know that the church has always been a constant in my life. Time goes fast," he said. "We become very busy and preoccupied. But somehow, some way, I've grown up here all my life, and the church is a constant. And I appreciate it, and I love it." And so I got thinking about constants in your life. You know, Jerry Arnold, who most of you haven't met because he's an 11 o'clock guy. And you know how those 11 o'clock people are? He was a very proud Marine, Korean War veteran, sat there in the second row every single Sunday. I remember the first time he came to church, and he walks out the door, and I had had a prayer for veterans on that Sunday morning. And as he walks out the door, he looks at me with kind of a twinkle in his eye, but there was a seriousness about it. He says, "Pastor Don, I appreciate the fact that you pray for veterans every Sunday. But today you prayed for World War I, World War II, and Vietnam, and you forgot," and I said, "the Korean War." And he said with a smile, "Don't you ever do that again." Which is why I had him up here, and we forgot the Korean War. And I'm thinking, who are the constants in your life? I remember as a kid, my constants were my grandma and grandpa. And when I was a little kid, I believed that grandparents were like born at the age of 70 and just stayed that way. And I also believed, honestly, because every Sunday afternoon we'd go into the city for pot roast. And so I believe that grandparents were 70, they stayed 70, they lived forever, and every grandparent lived in the city of Chicago. And I remember how I struggled as a young kid when my grandparents got sick and then had to go to their funeral. I learned that the circle of life is different when you grow up. Even my parents, just knowing they were there. My dad was such a constant. I've told this before. Every Sunday evening at 7:37, I would sit down with a glass of brandy and call my dad. And I would call my dad, and he said, "Reverend, how are you?" And I said, "How's that VO on the rocks?" And he said, "Reverend, I'm older. I drink my VO on the rocks at 5 o'clock. I only have one, and that's it." And then he would say, "How was the sermon today, Reverend?" And I would say, "Dad, as usual, it was average." And he would say, "Well, there's nothing wrong with being average." Then I'd say, "I love you, Dad." And he would say, "You too." And you too is the Swedish way of saying, "I love you." Do you have people in your life that kind of just disappear? And you kind of wonder, where'd they go? What happened? It happens in the church all the time. Kids grow up here, they get confirmed here, maybe they get married here, and then you just have no idea where they went. They just kind of disappear into thin air. Well, the other day, Peggy and I walked into this place to exercise for the very first time. We were just kind of walking around, and all of a sudden I hear the words, "Pastor Don." And I turn around, and there's Zoe. And Zoe is a young lady that I baptized 26 years ago. And I introduced her to Peggy. And I said, "Well, Zoe, where do you live?" And she says, "In Elmhurst with my boyfriend." And I'd like to give you a picture of my boyfriend. So she gets on her phone, and her boyfriend is a Iraqi veteran, Marine, stepped on a landmine, and is a double amputee. And she showed us his picture, and he was a gold medal winner in the Seoul Olympics in South Korea. And he's determined to get even stronger, so he's having all these surgeries to kind of stretch his legs so his prosthesis work. And I just was thinking to myself, where have you been? Look at that circle of life. That's not the way you planned it. I'm sure that having a boyfriend who's a double amputee, and I'm sure his circle of life didn't include that, but somehow, some way, the church has always been a constant, has always been something that gave her some courage and some hope. It's in that circle, our circle, your circle, my circle. That's where the good Lord lives. That's where the good Lord speaks. And that's where Jesus walks. Tomorrow is a national holiday. It's in honor of a man who carries the same name almost as the son who started the Lutheran Church 500 years ago. So maybe tomorrow each one of us can take a little moment to pray for peace, which is what both Martin Luther stood for. Maybe we can take a moment to think of the men and women who sacrifice sometimes their life or their legs so we can live in a country of peace. And maybe we can pray that each one of us, in our own way, will be a constant and an inspiration to somebody else. Amen. If you're able to, please rise. The creed is on page 105.